One of the hardest things for a lot of people that they have to mentally struggle through when they think about God and they think about their own life is, why would God allow such evil things to happen? Whether it be to them personally or to their family members, like, why would God allow such bad things to happen? Or like, maybe they ask questions like this: does God have any part in the bad things that are happening? And this has been such a struggle for so many people that some people end up in the conclusion of thinking like, if God's good, God must have nothing to do with any of the pain that goes on here in this world. That's one kind of stance that some people take. And that makes sense logically, right? It's like, if God's good, pain doesn't have to do with good, so maybe he has nothing to do with that. The problem is, the way God presents himself in the scriptures and the way the Bible talks, God actually sometimes talks like he's a part of the struggle, and he's a part of the pain, and he even uses the bad things for good. And these questions are good questions to have, right? And they are questions that I really think the Bible helps us answer. And sometimes there's like propositional statements where God will say stuff like, I form light and create darkness. Like, that's in Isaiah 45. Like, sometimes God tells us things very black and white, like, this is what I have to say about good and evil. And then in the scriptures, sometimes there are stories and narratives that show us things about God and his sovereignty and his control and how he uses bad things for good. And that's what we're going to study today. We're going to study a story. And it's the beginning of a story. The life of Joseph starts in Genesis 37, and really it goes all the way to the end of the book in Genesis 50. So we've been studying Genesis since the beginning of the school year. And after this sermon today, we only got 4 more lessons from the book of Genesis. We're going to go pretty fast through Joseph's life. And we're only going to focus on one chapter today. So this is the beginning. This is the start of his life. But the big overarching theme from his life is, you are going to see bad things happen. And you're not going to see God intervene very much. Or at least that's what it looks like. Things are going to happen in his life that are unfair. People are going to sin against him. He's going to make some bad choices. But for the most part, it's other people making bad choices that affect him negatively. He's the victim of most things that take place in his story. Yet, we learn something about how God can use evil things and even sinful actions that people take for good. And we learn something about that, and we want to start here in Genesis 37. So grab a Bible, let's look at Genesis 37, only really focusing on one chapter today. I know we've been covering a few chapters at a time here, but I want to start by really focusing in on how this story gets set up. And then for the next 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to talk about how God shows his power and his control. And really, we see Joseph as a good example. Jacob was kind of an iffy example. He had some good things, some bad things. Isaac, we didn't learn very much about him. Only a couple chapters that really focus on him. And again, with him, good and bad things. In Abraham, he gets a lot of chapters, a lot of really good, but also some bad. Joseph is an interesting character because it's the first in this line that is almost all good. His actions, his responses to situations are almost, I would say, except for a couple things that happen in the text today, they're almost all the right thing, that we can look at Joseph and say, I want to be like Joseph. I want to respond to my hard situations in life like Joseph did. So check it out, Genesis 37. This is after a few chapters. We skipped a couple chapters here. Chapter 33 is where we ended up. And we found Jacob was back in the land. He meets Esau. It's all good, right? They hug it out and they weep a little bit, right? These brothers cry. Then the next thing that takes place is a very, very bad thing in Jacob's life. They get near a town named Shechem, and there's a man in the town named Shechem, the prince. Like, he's the next in line to be the ruler of that city, and he finds one girl very attractive, and it's a girl named Dinah. Dinah was the one daughter of Jacob, and this guy takes advantage of Dinah, rapes Dinah, and wants to marry Dinah. Horrible situation. And then the narrative's like, well, what takes place next? What's going to happen? So 2 of the sons, Simeon and Levi, they step up and they make this plot, a lot like their dad made some plots in his youth. And this plot was have all these men get circumcised, right? And while they're, recovering from that surgery, we'll go in and kill every last man. And that's exactly what they did. So now you've got 2 of the brothers of Jacob who've just slaughtered the men of a city. And Jacob confronts them and says,
we're going to die because of what you did. You took out one city. What about when all these cities combine their forces and want to attack us? That's the last we've heard from Jacob. Then he settles in Bethel, where he met God, and we get a little genealogy about Esau in chapter 36. Then we end up in chapter 37, which starts with a summary statement. Genesis 37:1 says, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojourning, the land of Canaan. So where Isaac and Abraham walked around, that's where he's going to live from this point forward. These are the generations of Jacob. Remember when we started studying the book of Genesis, we talked about the word generations was like a very important word. It's the Hebrew word toledot. This is the last, time marker about the generations of a certain person for the rest of the book. So the rest of the book is going to talk about the children of Jacob. Verse 2 says, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. Now, a couple things. 17. Oh, that's kind of cool. We got a teenager. This is our first biblical teenager that we're studying, other than Isaac. He was like 13 or so. Maybe we don't know his age. But this is the first time we get a very clear time marker. This guy's 17. Is anybody 17 in the room? Show me a show of hands. Who's 17 in this room? Okay. All right. Joseph is your age. Congratulations. Which is going to be important, right? Because of all the sons born, he's on the younger end, right? Remember Joseph? Joseph was the son of Rachel. Rachel was the most loved wife of Jacob, right? But he's 17, and he gets to work, right? Which maybe there's a good little application there. Maybe if you're 17, it's time to get to work, okay? Maybe doing something, okay? It says he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. He was a boy. What does that mean? So I want you to imagine, you got a bunch of big, burly shepherds, a lot of them in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and then you got a 17-year-old who joins them. What's his job going to be? Is he going to be boss of everybody? No. He's going to be boy, right? It's like he's going to be a servant. So even that word boy, there's a connotation in Hebrew of servant, slave, the lowest on the totem pole. That's him. He's starting. He's a bag boy at the grocery store, okay? He's a janitor. He's starting out. He's doing his first job, basically, but he's helping with the flocks. And look who he's working with. The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, okay? Why does that matter? Well, you know that Jacob's oldest sons were actually Leah's sons. Those were the chief characters at this point. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Those are the older brothers. Those are the guys that probably have the most responsibility. Who has the smaller flock? The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Those are the other sons, the younger sons. So he's not even with the A team. He's with the B team, but he's the bat boy on the B team, okay? Do you see that the text is trying to tell us Joseph is working, but he's the bottom of the totem pole, okay? That's going to be important in a second. It says, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father, okay? So he's the son of the boss, and he's the most beloved son of the boss, and what does he do? He complains about all of the middle managers. He complains about all of his bosses and managers to the CEO. That's what's happening here, okay? He's going over everybody's head. How do you think that's going to work out, especially when we're dealing with brothers? And maybe this family that's had a history of favoritism and jealousy. Not a good idea. So I'm going to argue Joseph bringing a bad report of his brothers to his father, is that a sinful thing? I don't know if it's a sinful thing, but I don't think it's a wise thing, okay? This is going to be the beginning of his issues with his brothers. He's a tattletale, okay? And even the phrase, a bad report, if you look throughout the whole Old Testament, is there any other times that a group of people brought a bad report about something to another group of people? There is. It's Numbers 13:32, where the spies went into the land of Canaan. They looked at the land of Canaan, and they said, even though it's a good land, they're like, I don't know, it's kind of a bad land. In fact, it's a dangerous land. In fact, it's a land that eats up the inhabitants that are living there. It's an exaggeration. So I think what's built into this bad report from Joseph is that he sees problems with his brothers, and he complains. He goes over their head to complain to dad, but because of this phrase, bad report, being used in a kind of a negative way elsewhere in Scripture, I think there's probably some 17-year-old exaggeration about his brothers to his father, okay? Maybe it's based in some truth, but it's exaggeration, parents. Could we ever see that happening today? Is that possible that could happen today? Oh, yes, right? All your parents are going to say, yes, half the things that are reported to us, I get a bad report from my kids, but half of it comes with exaggeration and victim mentality and all these things that perhaps he has right here. So maybe Joseph sees that they're sinning. Maybe Joseph sees that they're not obeying their father's commands. Something he sees, so probably there's truth in it. But this is presented as not a good idea from Joseph, so not very smart. Now, verse 3. What would the response be? Would dad say, hey, let your brothers be in charge of you. You need to submit to them. They're the bosses when you're out in the field. No. He says that Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons because he was the son of his old age. So when the tattletale comes and tells dad, instead of dad doing the right thing, which would have been, hey, I get it, but I'm going to deal with them. Okay, let me deal with them. I don't want you to be the boss over them. He loves Joseph even more. This is not good. And it says here, because he's the son of his old age. He's Rachel's son. And he made him, so this is dad makes son, a robe of many colors, okay? A robe. When do you ever get a robe? I know when you get a robe, when you graduate. Do you know that there's some robes of like the common class, and then there's those smart people that get a robe of a different color? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Does this happen at your high school? This happened at my high school, okay? Let me tell you something about Laguna Hills High School back in the day, all right? I've heard that DEI has hit Laguna Hills, and they all have one color robe now. But there was a day when the IB students got the gold robe, okay? At other schools, they were like the white robes. Everyone else had the black robes. So we had the brown robes, and other people had the gold robes, okay? They're not that special, right? Like, I don't care that you wrote some really long IB essay. I don't care about Geneva, Switzerland. Don't tell me about any of that, IB students. I don't care, okay? Is anybody an IB student? Anybody want to raise their hand? Any IB students? No, wow. Nobody's all that, yeah. No gold robes. We're all common class people here. I got a brown robe, okay? The coats of many colors. Now, why would he do that? He's the special son, but he's the boy with the men. He shouldn't be given this elevated status. It's wrong. He should know. This is going to cause problems with the other sons. But instead of even keeping the like favoritism kind of like underground, he's like, I don't care. The world can know. I'm going to hand stitch you this amazing robe that you're going to wear when everybody sees it. You know what they're going to know? You're the boss. You're the boss. This is messed up. This dad should have known better. With all the favoritism that he had to experience, with his mom favoring him and his dad favoring his older brother, he should have known that this was wrong. By the way, robe of many colors might be a possible mistranslation. So that word colors, it's translated colors, can also be translated palms. So if it's a robe of palms, what that means is it's a robe that is a long sleeve. So it could just be a big flowing robe as opposed to a robe with a lot of different colors to it. If it's different colors in the ancient world, that means it was expensive, and there's a lot of things you can make of that. That might be true, but it also could just be a long sleeve robe that basically meant this: you're the boss, you're my favorite. Whenever the brothers see this robe, you know what they're going to remember? I'm not dad's favorite, this one is. So it was bad. Shouldn't have done it. Verse 4 says, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him, Joseph, more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. That makes sense. If the older brothers see the younger brother being favored, they're going to hate him. But also, they could not speak peacefully to him. That can mean a couple different things. One, to speak peace in the Old Testament is the word shalom, which means to give a greeting. So maybe it was like when he walked in the room, they didn't even acknowledge him. They couldn't speak peacefully. Like they wouldn't give him a shalom greeting. They'd see him and they'd put their head down and walk away. Or they'd ignore him. That could be it. Or it could be about the tone, right? Like brothers not being able to speak peacefully. That could mean like they were just constantly fighting. They were constantly bickering. That could be the case too. But the point is, Joseph, because of the favoritism of his father and his bad report, what do we find out about Joseph? He's loved by dad, but hated by everybody else. Okay? This is going to be a problem for him. And what I want to do today, as we just covered 4 verses, I want you to see these different little scenes from Genesis 37. I want you to see the sinfulness of this family, the bad choices they make, and then in a big picture, I want you to learn from them. So some of you might be able to identify with some of these characters and not with others. That's fine. I'm not saying you have to identify with every character and think like, oh yeah, I know something about that. Oh, I have felt something like that. But as we cover all the characters here, there's going to be a lot of common human selfishness and sinfulness that we're going to see, and I want you to learn from their bad mistakes. But then I also want you to step back and say, this whole series is about God working through their bad choices, through their bad actions. So if there are people in your life making bad choices and bad actions that affect you, before you say, not fair, I don't deserve this, remember that in Joseph's life, he experiences a lot of that too. And we're going to see his good responses, okay? So first thing, point number one, first thing we learn from a father here is I want you to learn from a father's insulting favoritism. Right? There's something we can learn when Jacob favors one son over the others. What's wrong with that, right? Is it wrong that he loves his son? No. And imagine confronting Jacob and being like, dude, why? I don't think this is very smart. Why are you doing this? You know what he could say? What's wrong with me showing love to Joseph? Joseph is my most respectful son. Joseph is the best son. Joseph is the only one that talks to me. Joseph is the one that respects me most. But like, what's wrong with it? It's not that you love Joseph. That's not the problem. The problem is that you're not valuing and caring for your other sons. That's the real problem with favoritism. It's neglect. That's the issue here. And he should have learned from this, but he didn't. And also notice that, like, he's the dad. He's the father. What are his sons going to do? They're going to look to the patriarch, Jacob, and they're going to learn from his example, the good and the bad. So when we talk about this, like learn from a father's insulting favoritism, you know what's super nice? None of you are dads with a bunch of kids in a big mixed family, okay? So none of you are in Jacob's shoes. That's great. Congratulations. But what can you learn from his bad actions and activities here? One thing that we should all take note of is when you're the leader or the boss or the mom or the dad, what you do affects your whole family. Just a verse for you to write down from the New Testament. Titus 2, 1-8 is a great set of commands that Paul gives to the older people in the church. And he says stuff like this: if you're older, you need to set an example for those who are younger. I'd even apply that down to a lower level, like if you're a senior and you're trying to invest in freshmen and care for freshmen, you need to set an example in your life to them. Yes, you're not a dad showing favoritism. I get it. But here's some other things. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith and in love, and in steadfastness. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent or respectful in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what's good, and so to train the young women to love their husbands and their children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands. That's the instruction for the older ladies in the church. He says, so that the word of God may not be reviled. He says, likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. My youth pastor said, there's this great long list of things for the girls to do, right? Because they can handle that, and there's only one thing that the guys can handle. It's just like, be self-controlled. Like, if they can get that, we'll take care of the rest, right? Self-control, one of the hardest things for young men, whether it's emotionally or with anger or with purity or with words, self-control, one of the hardest things to learn, right? And what he says here in Titus 2 is, if you're older, if you're like in the leadership position, make sure you're setting an example and teaching them how to do that. He says next, this is Titus 2:7, show yourselves in all respects to be a model of good works. In your teaching, you should show integrity and dignity and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that if you have an opponent, they may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. Important lessons. And that's to the leader, right? But I want you to think you're all going to be in leadership positions with people that you will affect at some point, right? Even if you're not today. But I bet a lot of you already are today. By the way, if you are an older sibling with any younger siblings, you already have a leadership position. If you're like a leader on a team somewhere, you already have leadership position. If you're a senior or a junior, you already have some kind of leadership to people that are younger than you. So don't wait till you're a parent to think, I can learn from this. I do think you can learn from setting a good example. And he doesn't set a good example. That's the bottom line here. And Jacob should have known, right? all the pain that his dad caused him by not favoring him and not even caring for him, neglecting him, he should have learned not to do this for others. Now, here's a question. Is it possible for God to use something like favoritism to accomplish his good plans? Absolutely. And that's what's going to happen next. Look at verse number 5, back in our text, Genesis 37. Look at verse 5. It says, now Joseph had a dream. Now, I lived with a man named Joseph, okay? He's the guy who sings in worship at church, right? I think it's so funny that Joseph has dreams, okay? Because the Joseph I lived with also has a lot of dreams. And I don't mean like singing aspirations, right? I'm not talking about America's Got Talent or American Idol. I'm talking about literal dreams. Ask him anytime, hey, what'd you dream about last night? He will be so excited that you asked him that question because he loves to talk about his dreams. And you know what? So did this Joseph, okay? This Joseph probably shouldn't have talked about his dreams. That Joseph, his dreams are crazy. Ask him about a dream, and he'll be like, oh, yeah, I got a bunch of good ones, right? We used to, we didn't usually have breakfast in the morning together, but, sometimes he would make breakfast when we were, living together before we all got married, and he would just, his breakfast conversation was like, what'd you dream about? What'd you dream about? I don't know. I don't think maybe I dreamed about something. I don't know. It's like, oh, I got one for you. And it's like, wow, that's crazy, right? So this Joseph had a dream, okay? Verse number 5. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Okay, so wise choices by Joseph or unwise choices by Joseph? I'm going to go with unwise choices by Joseph. Now, sinful choices by Joseph? Is he sinning against his brothers? I'm not saying that. I don't think that's what he's doing. But this is not wise. And there's, I think, a difference between sinning against people or making unwise choices that further divide relationships, okay? And that's what's happening here. I don't think he's sinning against his brothers, but I think he's making unwise choices with his words that drive a further wedge in this relationship. You can write it down like this. Point number 2, learn from a younger brother's reckless boasting, okay? Because he's going to tell his dreams. What's so wrong about sharing your dream? Well, once you read what the dreams are all about, you'll be like, yeah, I probably should have kept that one to yourself, brother. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. Okay? Once you write that down, I'll pick up here in verse number 6. This is Genesis 37, verse 6. He said to them, so remember, this is what makes them hate him even more. Verse 6. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Even that. Pause, right? Hey, brothers, you need to hear this. Listen to my dream. He doesn't even just say like, oh, guys, I had this crazy dream. He's like, you guys need to hear this, all right? Little brother gathers the older brothers and says, you need to listen to this dream, all right? Let's listen to the dream. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it together and bow down to my sheaf. So it's like we gathered all this grain, we put it in like this bundle. Mine was like this big bundle, and your bundles like started bowing down to my, wheat. Did you hear that, guys? Listen to my dream. Okay? So you see what I'm saying? Like, imagine your little brother, right? Your very arrogant brother. Your brother who shows up wearing his long, I'm better than you robe, saying, everybody, listen, I got this dream. You see what I'm saying? I don't think this is right for him to do, to gather his brothers together and to like dunk on them, okay? The dream's true. The dream is like a true thing that God brought to his life, but I don't think this was wise. This further divides the family. But it's immaturity. It's being naive. It's different than like outright sinfulness. And that's why like the book of Proverbs is so helpful. We'll look at some Proverbs in a second. But Proverbs oftentimes deals with things that might not be like sin versus righteousness, but like wise versus unwise. And we all start out as simple, which means without knowledge, and then we need to gain knowledge and wisdom so that we can act in a righteous way, in a wise way. And I don't think he's acting in a wise way here. I think his older self probably would regret this. Just like all of us, by the way. If we were to look back on things that we said when we were 17 years old, no offense, 17 years old people, but like, I think every person who's older than that, even maybe the 18-year-olds in the room, would look back and say, yeah, shouldn't have said all that, right? Yeah, I might have meant well, but I should not have said all that I said when I was 17, right? I think that's just how it is. And for him, Same idea. Okay, so he shares the dream. Look at verse number 8. And his brother said to him, are you indeed to reign, to be our boss? I know you're wearing your fancy coat, but you think you're going to be the boss of us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. That's one of the key things for me as trying to interpret this for you. Like, that's why I think this is wrong. Because they didn't just hate him for the dreams, they hated him for his words. He boasted about this. Verse number 9. Then he dreamed another dream. Uh-oh is right, okay? Uh-oh. Maybe, did you drop something? Sorry. I thought you were just interacting with me, Shane. Like, oh, you were. Thank you. It's active participation, okay? Uh-oh is right. He dreams another dream, okay? And kept it to himself. No, then he told his brothers again, okay? This is 17-year-old immaturity, okay? I don't know if this is outright sinfulness. I don't think that's it. I think this comes from a good place, but it's still not wise, and it still has negative consequences, okay? He dreamed another dream, told it to his brother, and said, behold. Even that, right? Like, shows up. Maybe there's hand motions. Behold, right? I have dreamed another dream. Uh-oh. Little bro, chill. Behold. Again, like, pretty grand, right? The sun and the moon and 11 stars. How many brothers do we have, Joseph? Oh, 11 brothers. We're bowing down to who? To me. Even that's more extreme. Last time it was just everybody's like wheat was bowing down to his wheat. Like it wasn't even him. Now it's like, oh, by the way, that sun and that moon and all y'all 11 stars, guess what? You're going to come cringing and bowing down to, guess what? And note the coat, okay? See what I'm saying? This is a younger brother's reckless boasting, okay? Learn from this. 17-year-olds or below, okay? Learn from this. There is a power that you have in your words that can do relational damage, even if you don't think it's all like sinful stuff you're talking about. This is not sinful stuff. In fact, I'd say this is revelation from God. Do you know what's going to happen, by the way? Even the sheaves and the wheat and stuff, you know what's going to happen? These guys are shepherds. They're not farmers. So why are we even dreaming about wheat? Oh, it's because one day they're going to need wheat. One day they're going to have a famine. And they're going to come down to the one person on earth who has the wheat. And who's it going to be? Joseph. This is revelation from God. And then the sun, moon, stars bowing down to him. Guess what's going to happen? They're all going to come and bow down to Joseph, not even knowing who Joseph is, but saying, please give us food. That's going to happen decades later. So this is true. This is even saying a good thing. And that's also interesting. You can say a good thing in the wrong way and still cause problems. You could say a true thing in a bad way, and yet it further divides. And I think this is what's happening here. Also, do you notice that there's two dreams? In all these sections in the Joseph narrative, there will be double dreams. Later on, when he's in prison, he's going to have two guys who both dream two things. A cupbearer and a baker. And then Pharaoh's going to have two dreams. So each time dreams show up in this text, they happen in doubles, in pairs. And then what Joseph actually says in chapter 41, verse 32, when he talks to Pharaoh, the king, about his dreams, he says, the doubling of Pharaoh's dreams means that the thing is fixed by God. So in Joseph's mind and his mentality, like when there's two dreams, it's even more certain. Just like I think you'd feel that way too. But he says, I know by experience. I get double dreams. We talk about two dreams. Boom. Like we know that's from God. And by the way, I don't think you should expect God to speak to you in your dreams. Okay? So if you dream about like becoming the president, I don't think that's God saying, hey, you know what you should do? You should be the president. Okay? Or, you know, especially if it's a sinful thing. If you have a dream about doing something sinful, this is not God's like prompting to say, you know what you should do? Like go do that sinful thing you just dreamed about. No. Okay? This was a unique thing, a unique time where God was speaking to these people through dreams. But what does the father say? What does Jacob say? It was too far even for Jacob, who favors him, right? He's like, I can't even defend this, bro. Like, I wanted to defend you, but I can't even defend you. Verse 10. But when he told it to his father, even that, like, Dad, guess what? You're going to bow down to me too, right? Like, this is what this all means for everybody. They don't even need interpreters. They get it. When he told his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him. Just like said, what are you talking about? And he said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother, by the way, your mother's dead, okay? Rachel has already died. So it's like, really? We're all going to just come bow down to you. Mom's dead, okay? She's not going to bow down, right? And you think I'm going to bow down? You think the brothers are going to bow down to you? We all just had to go through that humiliating thing with Esau. Guess what happened? They all bowed down to Esau, one by one. The text tells us this. This is the next time someone has to bow down to these people in homage. It's like, we did that to Esau. We're not doing it to you. You're the youngest. You had to bow down to Esau. We're not bowing down to you. Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come and bow ourselves down to the ground before you? So his dad's upset and mad. But he loves him. This is his favorite son. And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father, kept the saying in mind. It's like, although he rebuked him, he's like, but I wonder what that all was about, right? I wonder if God's saying something for our future there. He's more open to believe this. I said we got some Proverbs for you, just some Proverbs for you to write down. When it comes to reckless boasting, Proverbs 17, 27, and 28. Proverbs 17, 27, 28 says, whoever restrains his words has knowledge, and he who is a cool spirit is a man of understanding. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. You want people to think you're a smart freshman? Just like shut up a little bit. Everyone think you're smart. Seriously, that's what this says, right? Not all the time. Don't like never talk, right? Well, then you're mysterious, right? It's like, if you never say anything, it's like, what's with that guy? Like, I want him to say something, right? But yeah, there's wisdom in restraining. I think there would have been for Joseph. The other side of that is like when you want to rush to share. I think like Joseph gives us a bad example of this. He rushes to share. Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man who's hasting his words? There's more hope for a fool than there is for him. I talked about being simple versus being wise. I think Joseph is not acting like sinfully. He's acting simply, right? It's like innocent, but not good. It's naive. It's immature, not mature. A good verse for you to write down from Proverbs. Proverbs 22:3. In a section about money and riches, the author of Proverbs, Solomon says, the prudent, or the wise person, sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. That's a good picture of what happens with Joseph here. He just doesn't see it. He's just immature. He's not seeing what's going on. And I just want you, with your words, to be wise enough to be wiser than even Joseph was here, to say, yeah, sometimes I can say a good thing, but probably shouldn't say it now, especially when it comes to boasting. Reckless boasting, which is even a trait of the younger, maybe more than it is of the older. Be careful about that. There's this great pastor who wrote like 130 years ago. His name is Alexander White. He has this great book about the Bible characters. And he basically preaches one sermon on all these different Bible characters. It's this big, like 6-volume work. And I love to read it whenever we're talking about these characters of the Bible. And when he writes about Joseph, he goes hard against Joseph here. I'm going to read some of this to you. Listen to what he says. This Scottish preacher from 1896. He says, and so intent was he in what so much interested himself that he did not see the ugly looks on the faces of all of his brothers. And like Joseph, till we are well past 17 years of age, and have for some time been away from home, we too talk about nothing else but our dreams also. Other men dream last night as well as we, but they never get to open their mouths when they're around us. We talk the whole table down. We've just come home from the pulpit, or from the platform, or from the desk, or from the instrument, or from a visit, or from an entertainment, or from whatnot, and our vain hearts are full. We never think that all the other people at the table are as full of themselves as we are. We never see that they're also bursting to get to the only topic that interests them, which is not at all the same topic that also interests us. We mistake that silence and that suspense. We think that all that silence and all that suspense means that our audience are as full of our own interests as we are ourselves and are waiting to hear us, while all the time they can scarcely command themselves with weariness and disgust. Be sure that your company is as full of you as you are of yourself before you again give reins to your galloping tongue. Be sure that they worship you. Be sure that you are their God. Be sure that they're all your wife and children. Be sure that they have no interests or occupations or vanities of their own. Be sure that all their love and devotion and patience belongs to you. In short, be sure that you are in heaven before you keep the whole house waiting to break their fast till you have told out to the end of all your dreams that you had last night. He says next, I overheard a conversation, something like this not long ago. Shall we ask him to dinner and invite so-and-so to meet him? No, I think not. Why? Why? Well, because last time we were with him, he talked 2 mortal hours about nothing but himself, till everyone but himself must have felt contempt and disgust. And it was written as plain as day on every face. No, but only if he were not so full of himself, what a welcome guest he would be. Right? This guy writes this in 1896, and I just think not much has changed. Right? He talks about Joseph in that way, but I think that's a great lesson for us to learn too when it comes to speaking even like Joseph. Now, that's not even the main part of the story. That's just kind of the introduction. Verse 12 talks about what happens next. The drama. Back in Genesis 37, let's look at verse 12. It says, now his brothers went to pasture their flocks near Shechem. Shechem is where they killed everybody. So this is danger territory. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. Like, can you go check on them, basically? They're in a dangerous place. And he said, here am I. Like, Joseph's ready to obey. And he said to him, go now to see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him to the valley, from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So he travels many miles. He goes north from where he is to go check on his brothers. Notice this. It seems like Jacob would not have sent him if he knew how much the brothers hated him. Jacob would not have sent Joseph if he knew he was about to get killed or something. This is weird. Verse 15. A man found him wandering in the fields, which means Joseph got lost, okay? Why is this even included in the text? It shows us Joseph's a young guy, right? He's not as experienced with the trade routes. He's not as experienced as his brothers. He gets lost, and some dude has to be like, oh, your brothers are actually 13 miles to the north in a city called Dothan. So this man finds them, says, what are you seeking? I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're pasturing their flock. And the man said, they've gone away. For I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Why does Moses even include that? I think it's to show that he's innocent. He's honestly, earnestly seeking his brothers, saying, I want to make sure they're okay. They're in a danger zone, and he's in a danger zone. Now he, the lone son, is walking around near Shechem, where his brothers killed everybody. He's in danger. So some commentators look at this and say, the man that met him, that might be the same man that wrestled with Jacob. Maybe that was the angel of the Lord. We don't even know. Maybe that was. Maybe not. Maybe it's just some dude that knew what was going on. But it's a weird part of the story. Like, why does he include that? I think he includes that to say Joseph is earnestly seeking his brothers. Verse 18. And they saw him from afar. And before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. So as he's walking up with his big long robe, maybe he's a mile off, 2 miles off. They have 10 minutes or so, and they get together, and they're like, hey, that's Joseph. Hey, did you see Joe? Did you see Joe? That's Joseph. He's walking up. They conspire as a group to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer, which I wish the translation would say what it literally says. What it literally says is the Lord of dreams. Here comes the Lord of the dream, right? It's like, it's a mockery, right? It's like, oh, Lord of dreams is showing up. Oh, there's that dreamer. It's sarcastic. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits. Then we'll say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams, right? Oh, he thinks we're all going to bow down to him? Let's just kill him. His brothers hate him at this point. Right? But when Reuben heard it, he's the oldest brother, he rescued him out of their hands. Oh, this is good. Reuben must be a good guy. Reuben must be doing this for good reasons. Well, another thing that we skipped in the story is that Reuben has an affair with one of his father's concubines, Bilhah. Yeah, Dan and Naphtali's mom. He has an affair with her, and Jacob finds out about it, the oldest son. So remember the age gaps here, right? He might be relatively closer in age to her than he is to the other brothers, but yeah, not good. So Reuben, the oldest, who's supposed to have all the responsibility, is in a bad situation with dad. So why does he step up to save Joseph? Probably because it's like, dad hates me right now. But if I get on Joseph's side, maybe dad won't hate me so much anymore. Maybe. So Reuben's like, let's not take his life. Reuben said, shed no blood. So he's the oldest. He's the boss of them at this time, right? So he's like, we're not going to kill him. Let's just throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands and restore him to his father, right? So he's not forthright. He's not like, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to do. We're not going to kill him. We're going to take him back to dad. None of you are going to touch him. Stop it. He's like, let's just throw him into a pit, thinking that that would be good enough, right? This is a little bit cowardly. So Joseph came to him, and they stripped him of his robe, so they did lay hands on him. They stripped him of that fancy robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. They took him, threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. So it's probably like a cistern where they used to hold water, but it says there's no water in it. So he's not going to drown, but he's going to starve. He's going to die of thirst after a couple days. Look at the next line. Then they sat down to eat. That's just so evil. Like they waited to eat until they starved their brother. They wait to drink until they have their brother, expire of thirst. It actually says later, Joseph tells us later in the book, that he called out their names for help, and they didn't answer. Right? This is brutal. What I want you to do down, point number 3, I want you to learn from these brothers' jealous rage. They are so jealous, and it drives them to such extremes. And I want you to know that your jealousy will drive you to do things you would never think possible. Because when I read this, don't you just think like, guys, he's just 17. He's just the little brother. Just like whatever. It doesn't matter. Just let him talk. It doesn't matter. Just love him. Why doesn't somebody just take him under his wing? And Reuben kind of tries a little bit. I think there's ulterior motives for that. But when I read this, it's like, why don't they just care about him? It's because they're jealous of him. It's because they actually think he is going to be their boss. Maybe they're afraid these dreams will come true. And they sit down to eat. It reminds me of the Proverbs, which says the adulteress sins and then sits down and eats and says, wipes her mouth and says, I've done nothing wrong. Right? This is often what we do with our sin. Right? We do it and we're like, that wasn't wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. That's what they're doing. They're eating. And they're like, we didn't do anything wrong. So they sat down to eat, which, by the way, is interesting. Who's starving and who's eating? The brothers are eating and Joseph is starving. What's going to happen at the end of the story? The brothers are starving and Joseph has all the food. Right? There's a reversal that's going to take place. This is like episode 1 in a show where there's all these new threads and they're all going to get woven together by the end. They looked up. They saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum and balm and myrrh on their way to carry down to Egypt. So they see these travelers coming by. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Like last time someone killed their brother and concealed their blood, it says that the blood cried out to God for justice. Remember Cain and Abel? So I don't think it's a good idea for us to shed the blood of our brother. Like guys, probably. And what profit is there? We don't gain anything from that. But you know what we could gain something from? If we sell him for silver. Judah's plan. Judah's plan. It's just interesting that there's another guy named Judah in Greek. His name is Judas in the New Testament, who sold out his brother and friend, Jesus, for 30 pieces of silver. So inflation took its toll over those thousands of years. But it's the same thing. Right? Judas does this. By the way, Judah, later on in the story, is going to turn into the good guy. After he commits a lot more sin. Judah's not a good guy at this point, but he's going to be willing to sacrifice himself and be a substitutionary sacrifice for Benjamin. That's going to happen later on, but not here. He says, let's just sell him. So the Midianite traders pass by, which people are like, wait a minute, Midianite, Ishmaelites. I think there's, Ishmaelites is the bigger group. Midianites are a type of Ishmaelite. So the point is, it's just two names for the same group of people. They were passing by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Reuben clearly wasn't around at this point. Verse 29, when Reuben returned to the pit, he saw that Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes, which is ironic. Someone else is about to tear their clothes later on in grief. And he returned to his brothers, and he said, the boy's gone. Where shall I go? Oh, Reuben, yeah, I know you're worried about yourself, right? Oh, you were going to save Joseph? That was for yourself, dude. That wasn't virtue. That wasn't like, oh, I'm selflessly going to help my brother. It was, I had a golden opportunity to gain more favor with dad after I blew it before, right? Now, I'm going to be even more trouble. Where will I go? I'm in so much trouble with our father when we get back. Verse 31. And then they took Joseph's robe and they slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. Okay. I'm saying learn from the brothers' jealous rage. Just some verses for you to write down from the New Testament. James 4, 1-2. What causes quarrels? What causes fights among you? Right? You might not be murdering the people in your small group, but you might be murdering their reputations, and you might be harming them with your words. What causes quarrels? What causes fights? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and you quarrel. You do not have, so because you do not ask. Jesus says this, Matthew 15:19. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. It's out of our hearts. Learn something from their jealous rage. So you know a lot of the people that you say you hate, right? Maybe you don't have a long list, but if you say, I hate that person. Do you know what most of the time it's because of? You are jealous of them. You envy the acceptance they have. You think that they shouldn't have it, but maybe you should. You don't like how people don't see them the way you see them. And that's what causes hate, oftentimes, is envy or jealousy, just like we see with these guys here. Do you see the ugliness of that, right? Do you see any of that in your own heart? Right? Jealous rage. Even if it doesn't express itself out like these guys that wanted to kill their brother. It's ugly. And it's not just an external thing. It's a heart thing. That's why I gave you Matthew 15. Jesus says it starts in your heart. It was in their heart first. Then it was lived out. If you see it in your heart, deal with God. Like we said, wrestle with God and confess that to him. See the ugliness of that. Now, verse 32, back in our passage. After it says they take the robe, they slaughter a goat, they dipped the robe in the blood. Right? What blood? Goat's blood. What are they about to do? Verse 32. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Not true. They didn't find that. You know that meme? Lie. We'll play that game, okay? This we have found. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not, right? It is. So, their plan was to say that a wild animal ripped him apart. Do you know what they never end up saying? A wild animal ripped him apart. They have a more sly way of doing it, right? They're deceiving their father. Their father who? Their father Jacob. What did Jacob do when he was younger? Did he ever deceive his dad with a robe and maybe goat skins, the skins of a goat? Now we have him being deceived by his son's robe and the blood of a goat? Yeah. That's what's happening here. It's ironic in a sad way. And he identified him and said, this is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is, without doubt, torn to pieces. Right? Horrible. He thinks his son just died. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days. Right? This is the natural response. This is what you would expect. With all that favoritism, it's like God gave a son and God's taking away a son. And he mourns. And I think at this point, we are sympathetic to Jacob, right? Like, that's horrible. Horrible to lose a son. Horrible to lose your favorite son. But maybe there's a lesson in here for you, Jacob. The favoritism was wrong. You need to love these other sons. You need to bear with their sins too. You need to correct and exhort and help them as well, not just focus on this one son. You would think that's what he would learn, but that's not what happens. Verse 35 says, all of his sons and his daughters, which is likely daughters-in-law, because he has 11 sons and one daughter. Point is, these daughters-in-law and these sons, they rise up and they try to comfort him, right? Maybe on day 3 or 4, or maybe on day 10 or 11, they say, okay, Dad, let's eat, let's get back to some normal life. And he says, no, he refused to be comforted. And he said, no, I shall go down to Sheol. I shall go to the grave to my son mourning. In other words, I care more about my one dead son than my 11 living sons and my 11 daughters-in-law. I would rather die and be with that one son than be alive with all of you. This is not good, okay? This is his favoritism, just like it's the fruit of the favoritism. It's the result of him showing favorites. Thus, his father wept for him. Point number 4, I want you to learn from a father's excessive mourning. I know that almost feels like we shouldn't even say that a father who loses a son could be excessive in his mourning, but it is possible for a parent to mourn in an excessive way. Because remember, the whole problem was favoritism. If people mourn in such a way and for such an extent and for such a time that neglects the people that are alive, that are right in front of them, that understandable and right reaction of mourning could turn into a bitter thing that divides families even further. By the way, one commentator was like, you know what could have helped if his sons really wanted to comfort him? Maybe after a year, maybe after 2 years, after it was very clear, like, Dad is not getting over this. You know what they could have done? They could have got on their camel and went down to Egypt and found Joseph and been the savior. But none of them do that. So, like, the comfort. What's the comfort? What do you tell Dad? Hey, it's okay. Hey, I'm so sorry what happened to Joseph. Every word of comfort is a lie. Every week, every month, every year, it's just secret on top of secret on top of secret. I mean, did the daughter-in-laws even know what happened? Did all the husbands tell their wives? Maybe. How long? Did everybody know? Like, who knew about Joseph? The one person who never finds out until Joseph reveals himself to the brothers is Jacob. He never finds out until then. But what can we learn from this father's excessive mourning? This is selfish mourning, okay? Which initially, mourning is good, right? I think of Job. Job 1 talks about what Job does when his children die, right? Which none of you have been in that situation to that extent, having a child die, right? Like Jacob feels here. But Job he lost multiple sons and daughters in the same day. He shaved his head, fell on the ground, and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. The moping that happens for extended periods of time, even when there's loss, is not right. One of these characters is going to deal with the sovereignty of God better than the other, and it's Joseph. He's going to deal with it. He's going to get over it. He's not going to act like a victim. Jacob is. Jacob's going to stay moping. Just like in Job, one of those characters at the beginning responds well and one doesn't. Job's wife does not respond well. Job does, but Job's wife doesn't. Chapter 2, verse 9 says, Job's wife came to him and said, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he rebukes his wife. He said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we receive good from God and not also receive evil? And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Right? Jacob should have gone back and remembered the God who revealed himself. He should have remembered God at Bethel. He should have remembered the promises that God made, saying that in life and in death, God has made these promises. And for these sons, I need to love and care for these sons that I have that are alive. I know he didn't have the Psalms, but we have the Psalms. We should think of, even when there's heartbreak, and even when there's horrible things that we feel like have been taken away, even if someone that we love were to die, we need to remember what the scripture says. Psalm 34, verses 18 and 19 says, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit, right? Jacob's not turning to God. Jacob is moping after a while. It says next, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. It's a wrong mentality to say, I'm going to stay sad forever. Psalm 147, verse 3 says, God heals the brokenhearted and he binds up their wounds. Jacob was not believing that. Think about how much God cares for his people and their broken hearts. Also think about God's goodness, how it's been chasing him down. Psalm 23 says that at the end. Surely goodness and mercy shall chase me down all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Right? That's where Jacob's mind should have been. Right? Jacob is selfish when he's favoritistic. Joseph is naive and selfish when he shares. The brothers are selfish when they're violent, and in their jealousy they rage against their brother. And Jacob is selfish. Do you see that this selfishness thing is the plague of humanity, that we oftentimes think of ourselves and not of what pleases God and what is good for others? Super important. Our attitude about God's sovereignty in our trials is going to going to really dictate the decisions we make. And we're going to see more in Joseph's life about that. But I want you to think of these characters. Very different, right? And a lot of you, you're like, dude, point number 4, I got nothing for you on that. I don't experience that. But point number 2, yeah, no, I need to learn from that. Or, hey, point number 3, I really need to work on this jealousy thing. I really need to see that and identify that. So even if it's just one of these points that you latch onto this week and you think about, I want you to see how this plays out in real life. But even in your life, how can you act in a godly way because of these characters? We want to talk more about that on Wednesday night in small groups, okay? Let me pray for you that God would teach us. All right, let's pray. God, help us grow in our understandings. Help us be humble and recognize where we fall short like these characters. And also, please grow us. Please make us more like you. We know we want to mourn in the right way. We want to deal with our hard brothers in the right way. We want to use our words in the right way. And we also want to love people in the right way. We know these characters didn't always do that. We know sometimes they do good things, but I just pray that we would be more success than failure in these areas. Please teach us and please grow us through this sermon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.